Hello, good to see you. How are you all? This audience is very spread out. I hope you can hear me. I sound very loud to myself. My name is Merrick Furst, and I want to tell you something about work that my partner Matt Shanoff and I are doing at this place, which is my office in Atlanta, Georgia. It's called Flashpoint. Tell you a little bit about myself for 2 seconds. I've done both academics and business in my career. I'm a professor of computer science at Georgia Tech now. Before that, I was a professor of computer science at Berkeley, and I was a professor of computer science and a dean at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh for many years. I've also done 8 startups where I was the CEO of the startup, and now we have a new way of doing startups, and I want to share some of that with you. We have to make this work. Does anyone know how to make this work? No. My goal today is to tell you something that we've figured out, or to give you, I think we figured it out now, maybe. I want to share with you something we figured out. So I actually have the intention of making it possible for you to walk away knowing something. So I'm going to use some teaching technology. I'm going to use some active learning technology to make it possible for you to have some chance to remember something that I've said today. So I'm going to do that by doing quizzes along the way. So the first quiz is this. What's the chance that a startup is going to succeed? Is it 90% chance? How many of you are doing startups? How many of you invested in startups? How many of you care at all about startups? How many of you will not raise your hand no matter what I ask? Okay. It doesn't work if you raise your hand. So what's the right answer? Is the answer 90% succeed? 9 out of 10? Is it 1 out of, is it 10 out of, 1 out of 10? 10%? 1 in 100? 1 in 1,000? Worse than 1 in 1,000? Who has a guess? A. B, 10%. How many people think 10% succeed? 1 in 10. The correct answer. It's probably worse than 1 in 1,000. Chance of success is about 1 in 4,000. Seems to be the true number of successes. Very low likelihood. How many of you think you're going to succeed at your startup? Yes. It's amazing. All 3,999 people are not in the room. You just happen to be here. The other correct answer is that nobody knows. And I'm getting a lot of feedback. You'll explain to me how. If the right answer is 1 in 1,000, I want to share with you some reason to think that what we're doing has some value, because this is what our portfolio looks like. We've invested now out of 2 funds. Flashpoint Investors 1 looks something like this. Each one of those dots represents a startup that we've worked with. The ones that are colored in, they have revenue. The ones that are darkly colored in have raised capital. 2 of them have raised a great deal of capital. Collectively, they've raised about $312 million from first-tier investors. On the left, we can look and see which of these startups paid attention to the new methods that we're trying to get them to work with. And that portfolio looks like a typical portfolio at this point. About 1/3 of them have stopped, 1/3 of them are going along at not much happening, and 1/3 of them are making some progress. This is what happens to the startups that we work with when they apply our new ideas. That portfolio on the right is a lot more interesting, we think, than the typical 1 in 4,000 portfolio. The numbers are interesting to us. These are companies, 33 companies that we started with from scratch using our new approach to creating startups. That portfolio is worth over $1.2 billion at the moment. It's returned the fund and more. Okay, so I go in the wrong direction now. How do I make it go the right direction? What I'm here to talk to you about today is what we're now calling reliable innovation for all. It's not just a matter of making startups that work, but it's a matter of making startups reliably, intentionally being able to go and start a startup that has a chance of becoming a scalable success. We think it's possible, and we think that it's possible now because we think there's a secret that people haven't noticed. And I think if you see that secret, and you know how to manage yourself around that secret, you can reliably get innovation success. And that leads us to a new approach, and I want to share with you some of the insights about the new approach. So one thing you should know is if I were going to tell you something obvious, I wouldn't be that helpful to you. There must be something non-obvious happening in order to explain why it is that only 1 in 4,000 typically succeeds. That is, the other people who are not succeeding, it's not because they're stupid, it's not because they're not working hard, it's not because they're not getting good advice. There must be something else going on, and perhaps that thing that's going on which leads them to failure is not obvious. So what I'm here to tell you about today is something non-obvious, so you have to accept the fact that it may sound like it stretches your mind a bit. For what it's worth, it has academic credentials. The university where I work, which is one of the top 4 engineering universities in the country, awarded this work that I'm going to describe to you. Its top award for the entire university in 2013 for the Outstanding Achievement in Research Innovation. So it has technical chops. Okay, let me ask you a question. What causes startups to fail? Or another way of saying it is, what do you have, do you suppose, to get scalable startup success? Do you think you have to have funding? How many people think you have to have funding to have scalable startup success? How about talent? Do you have to have talent? How about product? Do you think you have to have product? How about demand? Customers? How many people think all of the above? How many people think none of the above? We believe, and we've come to believe this for a good reason, the answer is you don't need funding, you don't need talent, you don't even need product, you just need to have demand. And demand is the hardest thing to find. So let me ask you a question. What does it feel like when you have demand for your product? Have any of you had products for which there's actual demand? Any of you built something which is scalable, in which demand happens? Demand feels like this. Demand feels like a whirlpool. It feels like your customers are trying to get from you whatever it is you're trying to sell. It doesn't feel like I have an idea and I'm going to talk to people about it and they get excited about it. It doesn't feel like I'm going to explain it to them and give it to them for free, hoping that they'll pay later. That's not what it feels like. What it feels like is they're demanding something from you that they have to have, and you feel like you're being pulled into the whirlpool of their lives. You think you can construct demand? Can you create demand? What do you think? This is what it's like when you try to create demand. You spend a lot of money to make it look like it's a whirlpool, but it doesn't actually create demand. The minute you stop spending money, it just dissipates. Demand is something much more fundamental. We have to talk about what it is and why it is we don't see it. We have a name for this where we are. We call it authentic demand. And authentic demand feels like, here's what it feels like. Here's the experience of it. You walk up to someone and you say to them, I want to explain to you what it is we're thinking to work on. And in that moment, when they get it, they grab you by the lapels and they don't let you leave the office. And if you leave the office, they get on airplanes and they fly from other cities and demand pricing for products that don't even exist. That's what authentic demand feels like. We think that it's central. That if you don't have an authentic demand in your business, you have no business. Your business is basically dead. It's only going on as long as you can fund it or you can actually do it yourself. It's not until you have an authentic demand that draws you to it, that draws from you what it is you're trying to make. It's an unbelievably strong force. The funny thing about startups is everybody's walking around thinking, well, I have to give it away, and I'm going to give it away, and when they finally start to like it, then they'll pay me for it. Or it starts very slowly and nothing seems to happen. The funny thing about authentic demand is that's probably the farthest thing from the truth, that actual authentic demand is an unbelievably powerful force. It's so powerful that you almost never see it in the wild. It's powerful like electricity is powerful. Gravity, not so powerful. How do you know? Because you see it all over the place. You can lift things and drop them. Electricity took us a very long time to discover electricity. Why? It's so powerful that you never see it in the wild. Two things which attract each other electrically, they come together so fast you don't even see it happening. Authentic demand is the same thing. The thing that drives commerce, the thing that drives companies and success is authentic demand, and you almost never see it in the wild, or you don't recognize it for what it is because it's such a strong force that it's already there before you even notice it. All right, so here's a question. Why don't you see it? What keeps authentic demand hidden? Why don't you see it? Why is it all the things you think of aren't really authentic demands? So is it because you haven't talked to enough customers? Is it because maybe you've talked to too many customers and they've confused you? Is it because you haven't figured out what people want? And famous people in the startup business say, don't make something people don't want. Find out what people want. What do you think? All of the above? None of the above? Any guesses? How about not talking to enough customers? What do you think? Is that what causes it to be hidden? You haven't talked to enough people. No? You still here? How about you've talked to too many people? How many think the problem is you talk to too many customers? Just ignore the customers, make something, they'll figure it out. How many people think you have to figure out what people want? So that's the most common answer. And I want to tell you something, and I promised you I would tell you something that didn't sound right. I want to tell you that couldn't possibly be the right answer. That is, you should not be looking for something that people want. And let me tell you why that is. Just think of all the things that you want that you never buy. Every one of those is evidence that finding something that people want is not what you're looking for. Because want doesn't drive buying behavior. So it can't be right. It's all counterintuitive, but what I'm going to tell you is going to make a great deal of sense, and you can turn it into money. The correct answer is none of the above. What gets in the way of seeing authentic demand is that you're living in a waking dream. That is, the world is not the way you think it is. People are not making decisions the way you think they're making decisions. You yourself are not making decisions the way you think you're making decisions. And because you're not, and because you're not aware of how much the world doesn't look like the way you think it looks, we're all making bad decisions about what products we make and how we sell them and how we make decisions. So I have to talk to you about how it is that we're living in a waking dream, and how it is that by being in this waking dream, you cannot see the world for the way it is, and therefore what you build is not being taken into the world because it's only taken into the world the way you imagine that it is. Let me show you what that feels like, sort of the movie version of a waking dream. Do you know this movie? It's one of my favorite movies, Inception. The way Inception works, a guy shows up and he has an idea for a product. He has a customer in mind, and his whole job is to get that customer to buy something. In this movie is fantastic. He can build anything, just like in software. He can build entire worlds. So what do you do when you're a founder of a startup and you have an idea for a customer in mind? You put together a team, and this is what you think your team looks like. They can pose. They have weapons. They're diverse. Only this is how the team thinks it looks. This is not how the team actually looks. This is how the team looks. The team is asleep. They're all plugged into the same waking dream version of the world. They all think that they know what they're doing, but they're all plugged into the same dream. The problem isn't that you don't know something. The problem is that you know something. The problem is that you believe things about the world. That is, there are things that you know that ain't so. You believe that people buy things that they want, and so you go looking for things that they want. Because you believe that there are things that you just know to be true, it never occurs to you to check to see whether or not you were right, whether or not those things that you just know to be true are true or not. We've come to a very interesting place at Flashpoint. We can work with founders, and we find ourselves, I'll tell you it's sort of at this advanced age, I think I've learned exactly one thing, and it's that I know one thing. And it's a very simple thing to know, but it's very hard to live this way. The one thing I know is that I don't know. So now when I talk to founders, and when Matt and I talk to founders, we ask ourselves, not are they right, because we can't tell. We often think we know whether they're right. We ask ourselves the following question: could they know what they're saying? That is, what they're saying, could it even be known that what they're saying is possibly true? Or do they just believe it? Because if they just believe it, they're not safe. Which changes the whole question for us. And this is the question, this is what I want to suggest to you. Don't walk around thinking that you know something. Walk around asking yourself, what could I know, and what have I done the work to find out? Because if you ask yourself what you could know, you get to use all that we know about how you can know things. So we focus now on what you could know, and that leads us to have founders who work with us, and we work with them to find out what we call the truth. It's usually something unbelievably small. It's an issue that's an issue for a large number of people. Almost everybody has it because that's what its nature is. It's so small that everybody has it, and then the market becomes enormously big. Can you look for it? What happens if you go looking for these true things? So then what happens is you start to feel like my favorite cartoon character. You all know this cartoon character? This poor guy runs after this little bird, this Tweety bird. I forget what his name, Roadrunner. He runs after Roadrunner, and he's constantly going after this little bird only to find himself in situations that look like this. So what's that situation? That's a situation where he discovers that he's chasing a bird, and the bird can fly and he can't. So let me ask you a question. His problem is he's wrong. It's funny because you can see how what it looks like then. What's it feel like when you're wrong? Anyone wanting to? Anyone in this audience ever been wrong? What does it feel like when you're wrong? What does it feel like when you're wrong? Anyone want to share? You've never been wrong. It's remarkable. Usually people say it feels awful or it's embarrassing, or every so often you'll get some macho person who says, well, I love to be wrong. Well, actually, the funny thing is that's answering a different question than the question I'm asking. Feeling bad is what it feels like when you discover you're wrong. I'm asking a different question. What does it feel like in that moment right before you discover you're wrong? What does that feel like? And the answer is it feels like something. What it feels like is it feels like being right. It's indistinguishable from being right. The fundamental problem with doing startups and doing innovation is that you walk around thinking that you're right, and because it never occurs to you that you might not be right, never occurs to you that you might be wrong because it feels like you're right, you never stop to check. Now I want to quickly run through with you some of the ways that founders really screw up. The first is you think you're going to make something that people want. Let me just tell you my own experience. I started a computer security company. Why did I start it? Because some friends came to me and said they can find all the bad bots on the internet. And I thought that was a cool thing. I went out to eBay and I talked to the chief information security officer at eBay. And I said, if we could find all the bots that are attacking your website or harming your customers, would you want it? And he said, wow, you'd save me about $40 million a year in fraud. He said, can you do it? And I said, well, I could make one. He said, go home and make it. I ran home, I raised money, I raised $2.5 million on a $5 million pre. I licensed this technology from university. We built a team. 6 months later, I ran back out and I said, okay, here it is, I've got it. And he checked it and it would work, save him $40 million a year. And you know what? They still haven't bought it. That was in 2006. And for years, I walked around asking myself, what are we doing wrong? Why aren't they buying it? We're going to charge them $150,000, and it's going to save them $40 million. And one of my closest friends is the chief information security officer who makes these decisions. Why haven't they bought? Now I ask you a different question. What made me think that I ever thought, whatever made me think they would buy? I had it all wrong. You see, people don't make buying decisions based on what they want. They're not rationally self-interested. People do make decisions, but they don't make decisions for the reasons you think they make them. And what gets us screwed up is we think that we know why people are deciding things, like it makes sense. That's the wrong thing. So the answer is, don't try to make things that people want. Try to figure out how they're making their decisions, and then sell them things that are based on how they're actually making their decisions, which is not how you think it actually is. Here's the useful principle. Don't try to figure out what people want. Figure out the following. People do what they cannot not do, and you can't get rid of the double negative. You have to have it there. That's reliable. It's very difficult to see, but when you see it, you see what they cannot not do, and then you offer it to them, and then they do it. That's reliable. It's a new way of thinking. So here's a thought. Maybe you can't figure it out by saying, do they want something? Maybe I should show them something and see if they want it. Does that seem like a good idea? How many of you make minimum viable products every day and follow that whole principle? You believe that? You have to show them a product and then see if they like it? Does that work? Does it delight them? So let me tell you, it can't possibly. Let me show you why. So imagine the following scenario. Guy works, he has a very tough job. Or a woman works, she has a very tough job. Every day she goes to work, and by Thursday she comes and she's completely exhausted. Can you just imagine how tired she is halfway through the week? And she walks up to the front of her house, and out of the front door of her house runs the cutest little girl you ever saw. She's adorable. And she runs up to her mother and says, Mommy, Mommy, I made you a mud pie. I made it out of mud. I took sand and water and I made it out of mud, Mommy. And the mother looks down at the daughter. Can you just see it? And she says, oh, that is the most beautiful mud pie I ever saw. I didn't even know I wanted a mud pie. How did you know? Now, here's the thing. I think everybody in that scenario is authentic. The daughter really did make a mud pie, and she loved making it for her mother, and the mother really thought it was the most beautiful thing she ever saw. The only thing is, I think it would be a big mistake for this daughter to think that any other mothers in the neighborhood want a mud pie. I think it would be a mistake for this daughter to even think that this mother wants a mud pie tomorrow. So what do you know from product? I mean, from the mother's point of view, this is what she saw. And from the daughter's point of view, this is what she got. But everybody's wrong. When you show product to people and they tell you that they're delighted by it, It's mud pie. It's always mud pie. It cannot be anything other than mud pie. And you won't feel like that's right. But I'm telling you, I'm trying to explain to you why it is 3,999 times that you try to make a startup, it fails. It's because you don't notice what you don't notice. There are things that you think that are true which aren't true. People's reaction to your product is not indicative of whether or not there's authentic demand, because it might just be they like you because you're the town you came from. You just can't know. So you can't show a product. That doesn't work. What can you do? You can do something sort of the opposite, which I sometimes think is like Zen and the art of startups. You do the opposite. Instead of trying to figure out what would people want, you figure out what do I have to do, and if I don't do it, they can ignore me. I'll just try to say that to you again. Instead of asking yourself, what would I make so that people want it? I ask, if I continue to be the way I am, they're ignoring me, what could I do so that if I don't do this, they will stop ignoring me? It's sort of the opposite. But it works to go the opposite. It's very hard to think this way, but it works to go this way. How about saying something like this? I'm going to make Uber for this, or this other company works, and I'm going to make something which works just like that other company. You kind of argue by anecdote. Does that work? How many of you have tried to do startups like that? So that's the obvious way to do it. Well, here's the problem. We'll see if this works for you. So I come up to you and I say, Anne approached the bank. Let's talk about that. Now, of course, what I didn't tell you is I'm thinking about Anne in a rowboat on a river. How many people had that in mind when I said Anne approached the bank? Nobody, right? So you probably thought of a bank as a building you go into with money. This is what the world is looking like. You don't even notice when people are telling you that the reasons that they do something or what your analogy makes sense, you don't notice the inherent ambiguity in the waking dream. You think you know what's going on, but you don't because you don't stop to notice it. Why? Because you're sure you're right. So you cannot argue about startups by analogy. It doesn't work. Here's the useful principle. Instead of doing that, come up with an idea, stick with it, but don't get stuck on it. At the first instance, the first inkling that it's not going to be working out, just move on to something else. Hold that tight. When you realize it's not right, move to the next thing. You can fix yourself. The whole thing together we're now calling authentic and reliable innovation. And here's how it goes. First, you have to see the world for the way it is. That is, you have to see the customers for the way they are, in terms of what can they not do. Then you have to figure out the following problem, which I didn't have time to talk about today, but I'm happy to talk to you about some other time, which is that human beings cannot change their behavior. Any of you that decided they wanted to lose weight or exercise more, and then 3 weeks later you stop doing it, it's not because you're not smart, it's because human beings have immune systems, psychological immune systems, that stop them from changing their behavior. Even to get your customer to buy from you as opposed to somebody else, that's a change of behavior, and you can almost never get behavior change. So even if you figure out what they can't not do, it's hard to get them to do it. Then you have to figure out how to change yourself to be able to do something different than you were doing before. And this is the big secret. The answer to everything is simply find a way to make your customers be able to be themselves more. This is us. We invest in startups. We work with startups. We're interested in spreading these ideas of reliable innovation for all. We have methods. We have tools. We have new ways of talking about things. We have a track record. It's not bullshit. It's not out of whole cloth. It's got mathematical and geeky technical background to it. We're here in Vietnam because we'd like to be able to spread the word and make it available to others. We also work with corporate teams who have come through. Coca-Cola put a team through, and the product that they developed at Flashpoint is now representing about 25% of gross sales in all of Japan. So this works at a large level as well as for startups. And I'm going to stop there and tell you, come visit me in my office sometime. So thank you very much for your time.